Fine. Um, Welcome to another episode of uh, featured program partners for the Fellows Program. Excited to have Tanzania Sewell join us today. We'll let her introduce herself a little bit, but really excited to have Tanzania in the Beyond STEM as a program partner for the Fellows Program. Um, This is being recorded and it'll show up later in the fellows space as part of an article, so you can view back if you didn't make it this time. We'll announce when it's available. But let's move on to the actual interview. And Tanzania is already ready and has all kinds of exciting stuff to tell us about what Beyond STEM can do for teachers and students. So let's get to it. Before we get into the actual, programming that you have available, and maybe some new initiatives that you're thinking of, tell us a little bit about you, the person behind Beyond STEM, literally,
Yeah.
and sort of what gets you excited about what you're doing, and why other people should be excited about having Beyond STEM.
Yeah, absolutely. So, thanks for giving me the time and the space to share a little bit more with the fellows. But again, Tanzania Sewell, I am the founder and executive director of Beyond STEM. And as an organization, we are on a mission to ensure the next generation of technology creators matches its consumers. And for us, what that really means is providing engineering forward STEM programming, specifically for middle school students in the Milwaukee area. So I myself am a practicing electrical engineer. And so I have found my way into engineering and have stayed here for, oh gosh, like 10 plus years at this point.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so, as someone who is currently an engineer who has gone through my K 12 experience, my undergrad experience, graduate experience, I am very much familiar with what it takes to be a successful engineer in today's world.
Hmm. Hmm. Cool, cool. That sets you up for, thinking about, you know, what it takes to get more, especially girls and students of minority background, interested in engineering. Um, so tell us a little bit about, or as much as you want to,
Yeah.
about the programming that you have developed, and who you're developing it for in a bit more detail than just middle
Mhm.
school students.
Yeah,
Let's hear a bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I will start by saying that the lack of diversity within STEM and more specifically within engineering is something that I live every single day. And so I have worked on teams where I was the only female, the only woman, the only person of color.
Hmm.
And so beyond STEM and the way that we approach programming is really designed to ensure that all students can engage with content and also can ultimately see themselves pursuing these careers. And so, key to how we approach curriculum or programming is first and foremost focusing on the application. And so, it's one thing to do a very kind of canned experiment that really exercises some of the fundamentals of, for instance, electrical engineering or mechanical engineering. It's another thing to then link that particular activity to, as an example, a healthcare application that is currently used in today's world. And so, from a programming perspective, we pretty much play in the enrichment space. And so we have our signature Saturday series. We won one series in spring, and that one is focused on the engineering disciplines. We run a second Saturday series in fall, and that one is focused more so on coding and tech. In addition to those Saturday series, we also offer after school programming. And so these are hour and 15-minute activities. We ultimately show up on site with all the materials needed, and we will run through an engineering, again, forward activity with students. We also offer some field trips or virtual field trips. So these would be in school, like during the
Hmm.
day,
Hmm.
experiences for students as well to engage with engineering material.
And for that last part,
Mhm.
do you do you rely on materials that are in the school where the students are, or are you bringing those materials, or?
So we bring all of the materials that we need on site. So it's as easy as scheduling time with us and
Mhm,
being ready for us to show up, and we bring all of the materials that are needed to for the students to have the best possible experience.
mhm. How do you sort of do you? I'm assuming you do. How
Mhm.
do you coordinate with the school, or maybe even the whole school districts, depending on who wants to sort of invite you to come in?
Yeah. So the coordinate.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I should
Yep.
be more clear.
Yep.
Coordinating in terms of how what you do fits with what the school does.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's really a conversation that we will have with either the teacher that we are working with or kind of the school as a whole. And so our offerings from an engineering perspective really span kind of a pretty broad spectrum. So we
Mm-hmm.
have our core or our foundation experiences, which really focus on like the engineering design process, thinking about how we identify problems in the world around us, thinking about how we go from identifying that problem to a tech-based solution. So those
Mm-hmm.
are really kind of our core, I would say, offering or experiences. Then above and beyond that, we have experiences that are aligned to kind of electrical engineering, mechanical,
Mm-hmm.
or software engineering. And that's where we really rely on a conversation with the teacher or the group of teachers that we will
Mm-hmm.
be working with to understand where they are from a curriculum perspective and what kind of makes the most sense for us
Mm-hmm.
to offer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Um, there was a question that was on my mind, but it slipped for a minute.
Okay.
So let's talk a little bit about sort of some additional initiatives
Mhm.
that you're considering, that maybe stuff that's in the works that teachers might want to know about, especially the ones that are in the fellows program because they're designing something new
Yeah.
and forward. You've
Mhm.
been using the word forward. They're trying to be forward with what they're creating for their students. So, is there something that they should know about what your plans are that they could really think about incorporating?
Yeah, so one of the things that we have started to do, especially coming out of our virtual reality of the last year,
Mm-hmm.
were activity kits. And so
Okay.
these are really self contained engineering activities that are a great way for students who are remote to kind of work through material, or
Mm-hmm.
even when the students are completely in class. So it's as easy as, ordering a set of boxes, opening those boxes, all of the materials, all of the instructions, all of the
Mm-hmm.
kind of deeper reflection questions are also
Yeah.
included. So it's
Okay.
really a kind of self-contained activity. And so that's something that we are super excited about beginning to offer
Mm-hmm.
as we kind of move into this next year.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, in addition to that, from an initiatives perspective, we are also very much looking for new schools to partner with. And
Okay.
so as we again open back up, after school programming becomes a lot easier to offer. Those in class school day activities also become a lot easier to offer. And so we are looking for schools or classrooms that are looking to really help to enrich the experience
Mm-hmm.
that the students are having.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's connect
Mhm.
what you're doing a little bit tighter with the fellows program. What drew you when we started talking about? I think there's some synergies here. Would you want to be associated as STEM, beyond STEM? Would you want to be associated with the fellows program? What drew you to say yes? This
Mhm.
sounds like it makes a lot of sense. And what opportunities do you see both for STEM, beyond STEM,
Mhm.
and for the teachers
Mhm.
that are now getting exposed to what you have to offer them?
Yeah, so it all goes back to project-based learning. And so I
Mhm,
think where that alignment lies between Beyond STEM and the work that the teachers are looking to embark on is really providing those smaller experiences that give the students the opportunity to exercise some of those fundamentals that they'll leverage
mhm,
when they get into kind of the project that they are working on.
mhm,
And that is a very crucial, I think, element of ensuring that the students are successful and actually meeting the deliverables of their project. So the more that they can have an opportunity to exercise some of those key things. So going
mhm,
back fundamentally to like the engineering design process, but even with that engineering design process, there's also the element of learning how to work in a team, learning how to share your ideas, learning how to
mhm,
create trade-offs when you
mhm,
guys as a team are deciding between two or three potential solutions that we think may work, but we have to, because of constraints, have to decide on one. So those are
yeah,
all
'cause those
places I think.
constraints are always there, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. And as an engineer, you always look for those constraints
Mhm,
because that can actually make your life a lot easier from a design
mhm,
perspective. But being able to really ask those questions, determine what is a constraint, what isn't a constraint, and being able to make those trade offs, those are all skills that should be exercised before you kind of delve into a larger project so that the students feel confident and equipped with those skills as they work through something that's a bit broader and definitely has greater impact, but that can sometimes be overwhelming for students to tackle.
mhm. Yeah, I'm glad you described that because that's really where I think we are very well aligned as two organizations. Uh, just briefly describing sort of our philosophy of that is that we think it's important, to sort of almost alternate
Mhm,
at the right time of learning, but alternate between practicing specific things,
mhm,
skills or competencies or whichever the student or group of students is indicating they are in need of learning, and then going to apply it in context.
mhm,
Go be creative, do something with it.
mhm,
Learn to go outside the context of, dry practice to how do I apply it to
mhm.
this new
Yeah,
thing,
yeah.
right? This new
Mhm,
issue or challenge.
mhm,
And so I'm really glad to hear you describe that because as teachers that are listening to this,
mhm,
you really get a sense for how you could use the different the
mhm,
offerings of the different organizations in the overall
mhm.
planning of how do I get my students from A to Z, with
Yep.
Z being what do I want the outcome to be.
Mhm, mhm,
And so I'm really glad that you did that. Thank you for that.
mhm,
Um, but then the question comes up,
mhm,
sort of practically speaking,
mhm,
um, you know, how do you provide the level of sort of dynamism or flexibility to say, okay, as a teacher, I'm planning to use it, the
mhm,
third week of October.
mhm, mhm,
Is Beyond STEM capable of helping me in the third week of October
mhm.
with that exercise, right?
Yep.
That becomes your challenge then to say,
Yeah.
we can do this.
Yeah.
We are here to support you, right?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And I will say that we are absolutely here to support and make sure that the endeavors of the teachers are successful. And so the earlier we know about
Mm-hmm,
kind of some of those support needs, the better, because we can definitely be flexible and ensure that we are helping to deliver, those experiences just in time so the students can, you know, be able to leverage them and practice them in real time.
mm-hmm,
So we're very much aware of the timing aspect and really getting that timing correct with a lot of these concepts is going to be key to ensuring that the projects overall are a success, but
mm-hmm.
also that the students again are confident in approaching some of these larger problems.
Right, and that's I would say it's important for our partners to be aware and to then organize themselves
Mhm,
to be available.
mhm,
Uh, both during what we call the STEM studio process,
Mhm.
the first 2 weeks of August, where we do a lot of the design. And I believe you've indicated you're
Mhm.
available during some part of it, not
Mhm.
all of the 2 weeks, but
Yeah.
the crucial parts where you can
Yeah.
make a difference in terms of, let's talk through how this,
Mhm.
practicing or exercising would work.
Mhm.
But then also along the way, stay in touch with,
Yep.
how are the teachers progressing? How are the
Mhm.
students progressing? And what can we do for you, right?
Yep. Yep.
Because we're talking about a
Mhm.
longer time frame
Mhm.
for these projects, which is new for most teachers. So we'll have that support along the way, certainly from us at Learn Deep, but also from our partners. So part of the reason why we selected,
Mhm.
organizations like Beyond STEM, because they're interested and capable of doing that.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Um, Talk to me about other things we haven't addressed. What do we need to explore? What sort of thoughts do you have in terms of how to help teachers sort of really get kids excited? We know we're talking about water related projects. We don't
Mhm.
know yet what it's going to be.
Mhm.
Um, but as you said, from a personal experience as an engineer perspective, um, sort of what sort of things should teachers think about to help kids get excited about, um, you know being involved with STEM related projects?
Yeah, so there are a couple things. I think first and foremost, and this is where, project-based learning really shines, is, connecting that learning and tying, the student's effort to a problem that is local enough for them to know and understand. And so
Hmm.
that's so important. If you take a look at some of the studies that have been written about women and students of color who ultimately matriculate into STEM fields, a lot of what you'll see is that those students are drawn to STEM fields because of the larger impact those careers have
Hmm.
on the world around them. And so the more that you can focus on, showing and highlighting all of the applications of these fields in in everyday life,
Hmm.
in addition to tying that to the project, I think the better in terms of keeping, students engaged and getting them engaged.
Hmm.
The other piece is really around failure and socializing the fact that failure is a part of the process. And
Okay.
so, again, going back to, and this goes back to, some of the literature that has been written around grit. But
Hmm.
the fact that within a STEM field, as you are working towards a solution, as you're working towards delivering a piece of technology, failure is a part of the process. And socializing and ensuring that the students know that it's a part of the process. So, the
Hmm.
most important thing about failing is that you learn from it and you modify your approach, as
Hmm.
opposed to looking at it as kind of a personal detriment. And so I think that is also like crucial to ensuring that the students continue to be engaged and progress towards, a final solution.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's, a lot of teachers tell us, at the beginning of the school year,
Mhm.
we're not going to start with the project right away because we need to build that, you know, maybe they're new sixth graders, new to middle school,
Mhm.
or coming back from class, and of course from holiday, and of course this year we have two new year groups, sixth
Mhm.
and seventh,
Mhm.
that have never been in person middle
Yeah,
school.
yeah.
So building that culture. But what I'm hearing you say is, it's important as these teachers begin to um, sort of teach with these project-based learning
Mhm.
concepts. I don't want to say principles, but
Mhm.
concepts. Um, it's important to think about, what about the culture
Mhm.
do you need to prepare the kids for, to be able to work in a project-based
Mhm.
approach,
Mhm.
and using that time not to just establish classroom culture, but really those elements that are necessary, such as teamwork, such as,
Mhm.
understanding that failure is associated with learning, as opposed to, okay, you
Yeah.
know, we have fewer and fewer of kids in the classroom because all the ones that fail leave the classroom. We put them outside. We don't do it that way, right?
Mhm.
This is project-based learning. You learn
Mhm.
from doing,
Mhm.
and from reflecting on what you see and what happens,
Mhm.
so that you can learn
Mhm.
and figure out a way to do something different and better.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm glad you brought that up, because that's I think an important thing, and it's part of that exercising.
Mhm.
Do little exercises
Mhm.
with your classroom, and as a teacher, um, practice yourself guiding kids through that failure and learning,
Yep.
because you need to model what that looks like.
Mhm.
They're not going to
Yeah.
figure that out on their own.
Yeah.
So use that first couple of weeks or a month to also practice those things.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I love that you describe it as culture. I also think about it, as a toolbox. And I think I shared this
Hmm.
analogy with Pete before.
Hmm.
But you have a toolbox with lots of tools that have, very specific uses. And as you're getting more familiar with your toolbox, you kind of pick up a wrench and you learn how to use it. Then maybe you put that wrench down, you pick up a hammer. And so with a lot of these concepts, it's about giving the students the space to explore kind of the application or the use of that particular concept, so that they have that stored as a tool that they can refer back to. And once they kind of move into working on the project, then it becomes okay, I know I have this set of 12 or 15 tools. I've seen something similar, elements of this particular problem before. Let me walk through the tools that I have and see what fits best, so
Hmm.
that I can leverage it and ultimately work to solve the problem. And so I think about it like from a toolbox perspective, and having lots of things at your disposal that
Hmm.
you can then use whenever you face a problem.
Hmm. Right, but I think both concepts go together, right? The toolbox um, is what you know how to use or do, or
Yep.
use something for doing, um, but then we're not talking about, hammers and drilling all the time. We're talking about interacting with
Yep.
people,
Hmm.
right, and
Hmm.
discovering what other people's issues are.
Hmm.
So I think that's where the culture part comes in.
Hmm.
You need to then be open to say, oh, I can't just go and hammer on the
Yeah.
wall
Yep.
wherever I
Yeah.
want.
Yep.
I'm in the context of
Of
working
this
with people.
context.
So
Yep.
how
Hmm.
so we need to develop that
Hmm.
part as
Hmm.
well.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, yeah, and you've talked about that. Those as sort of the other set of tools, right? Is
Yeah.
what, and I think the best sort of summary of the fear of failure was the guy who said, "I don't like to use fear of failure. I like, are you learning, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm only finding out stuff I already
Hmm.
know, um, I'm not learning anything as I go through this process. And so,
Yep.
the sweet spot is I ought to have an unexpected result half the time,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? Otherwise, I'm missing out on what I could be learning. And I think that perspective becomes another another tool in the
Oh
toolbox. Is
yeah.
this is how I should look at the failures.
Yep.
Oh, good, I got my unexpected result.
So yep, I love that.
and I think that's interesting, Pete, how you brought that up. I think that's where the challenge is for teachers, right? Because there's a psychological aspect to this, what I think Pete implied. Um, if you get failure 40 or if you get success only 40% or 30% of the time,
Mhm.
it's discouraging over time. You're not going to try it anymore. But if you get, disappointing results maybe 30% of the time, that means that the other 60 or 70% were good. So you did something well. There are some things that you still have to learn.
Mhm.
Now I'm encouraged to learn those other things because it can only get better. So that notion of what the sweet spot is and how you design for that as a teacher,
Yeah,
it needs
that's
to
the
be
tough part.
challenging,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
not overly challenging,
Yep. Yep.
right?
Yep. And that's where the sequencing comes into play, right? Because you almost have to build a student's capacity to be able to handle, when things
Mm-hmm.
don't go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
In kind of moving from, 60% correct or 60% of the time things go as expected versus, 40%, and ultimately moving to the point where it's flipped and, 40% of the time you're going to have success, which that 40% of the time I will tell you, really reflects reality more so than 60%.
Well,
So for
not over
those,
time though. As you develop and prototype and experiment, the successes grow and the failures grow less, right?
well, the problems get tougher.
No?
That's what you have to account for. The problems get tougher as well.
Okay, but we only give that to people like yourself who've been experienced with
Yeah.
failure, who can handle this stuff.
Yeah, no, but yeah, I absolutely agree. It really comes down to that timing and building, capacity in the students to be able to be okay with, only a 60% success rate.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
then
yeah.
being able to adapt to the
Mhm.
changing circumstances.
Yeah.
I think we met in person, I think the last time just before the pandemic, and
Mhm.
you were excitedly telling me about the kits you were putting together to
Mhm.
use in the classroom, and then
Mhm.
uh, you got to shift all of that to, okay, how do I figure out how to send these home?
Yep.
I think that was um, how much different was that experience, either for you or for the kids, from what you had hoped it would be in an in-person versus what you were able to do with the kids at home?
Yeah, so the big thing is that really important to how we approach, engineering and STEM learning is really that team-based experience. And so with moving from completely in person to now virtual, we lost a lot of that. And so what we had to do was to kind of stand up virtual equivalents, and I hesitate to even call them equivalents, but still providing, space and opportunity for the students to join as a group virtually and for us to still sort of exercise some of those team-based learning experiences from a virtual perspective. So I think that helped to close the gap, but it was definitely, much different having, a student work through a project primarily solo versus working in a team. And so other things that we had to do was really to think through how we structured the projects. And so over the course of our 6-week series, we start with like the easiest quote unquote
Mm-hmm.
project. And then we kind of gradually increase the difficulty because that gets the students kind of in, they get used to how we pose challenges, they get used to really using some of those fundamentals, and then we gradually kind of increase the difficulty of the project. So that, helped definitely. The other thing was really completely rethinking the projects that we posed in the first place. And
Mm-hmm.
so when we're in person, we pose very much open-ended projects that, require both, the creativity side of things as well as kind of that merged with engineering. But moving, virtually and moving to a box structure, we really started to narrow a little bit some of the projects so they were not as open-ended because some of that open-endedness really requires lots of coaching and really working, as a team. So those were the shifts that we had to make as we moved from running in person to virtual.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I think that experience is going to be it's a really useful insight, because who knows what's going to happen
Oh yeah.
over the course, right? If we don't get to do in person for the whole year, how we
Yeah.
can adjust and be
Yeah.
able to keep moving with the projects,
Yep.
even if it's whether it's a short duration or long. So I think
Yeah,
it's a
but
valuable
also
experience to have.
right, but also the learning that has gone into, um, what can you use virtual or asynchronous learning for, and what do you really need to plan to do in person?
Mhm.
It's not all negative. We couldn't do anything.
Mhm.
We've learned a lot, but we need to reflect on what that learning was,
Mhm. Mhm.
that we can then apply, constructively
Mhm.
in how we design these learning experiences. I was going to ask a question about, so why is learning in a group, it's different, but why is it better than learning by yourself?
Ooh, I would hesitate to say better.
Okay,
um,
I just threw out a word. Thank you for pushing back.
I would say they are complementary. Um,
Uh-huh.
And so the reason why I say they're complementary, so I think first and foremost, I think about what it's like to work, in a real world setting where you are producing,
Mm-hmm.
technology. The reality is that you're going to be working on a team.
Mm-hmm.
And so that right there, I think defines or necessitates us to integrate and incorporate a lot of that team-based work into how we approach STEM exploration and learning. So that's first and foremost. Secondly, when we talk about like learning and some of the differences between team-based learning versus individual learning, there's the part of I don't want to necessarily call it innovation, but really in that initial ideation phase, I think it's so important to have others around you who are also looking at the same exact problem, but bring a very different set of experiences to the
Mm-hmm.
table. That's
Mm-hmm.
where the innovative solutions come. And I think when we, again, bringing that back to the K-12 setting, when we get a group of students around the table who are the same age, but we know bring very different experiences to the table. That's such a rich environment for the students to tackle a problem
Mm-hmm.
and work together to find a medium between all of the solutions that they pose.
Mm-hmm.
That sort of work, I think, is going to be reflective of what they tackle, even if they don't, pursue STEM careers. The reality is all careers and all professions tackle very difficult problems, and the problems that we're tackling are going to get even more
Mm-hmm.
complex. And so being able to develop that skill set early, I think, is so important. When I think about kind of that individual learning, a lot of that time, at least from my perspective, can be spent learning those fundamentals. So getting your repetitions in terms of just the basics. So I think about the basics, from a math perspective, from a science
Mm-hmm.
perspective, some of those fundamental engineering concepts. That individual learning space is a great time for that sort of learning to happen,
Mm-hmm.
because the students are able to work at their own pace, number one, but secondly, they're also able to kind of measure their own progress as they again start to learn, and a part of that learning process is failing, but they have the opportunity and the space to reflect on some of the things that they've done wrong, and they can begin to correct those. And
Mm-hmm.
that individual learning ultimately is what you know maps back or is related to what that student can bring to the table
Right.
whenever they're working in a team setting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, I I mean, this is going to be such a jam-packed session with wisdom that when I write a little article about, well, we had this interview with Tanzania, and you should really watch this because of this and this. It's
Yeah.
going to be a list of all of these things that you have mentioned so far. I maybe a little bit
Mhm.
off
Yeah.
off track, but I wanted to ask you, and tell me if you in your programs,
Mhm.
if you don't get to do this, but
Mhm.
um, we touched on student progress,
Mhm.
um, and the question always comes up, and the fellows are going to be struggling with this because
Mhm.
of project-based learning.
Mhm.
Um,
I know where this question is going. Go ahead.
so let me do a two-part. So do you, in your programming, do
Mhm.
you get to the point of trying to figure out if your student has progressed,
Mhm.
whatever that progression is,
Mhm.
and two, do you get involved with maybe sharing with the teacher or whoever you're doing this for,
Mhm.
or whoever has asked you to come in? Do you share your observation of the
Mhm.
student has progressed to this point or
Mhm.
this well, or
Mhm.
right? How do you do this? How do you assess that a student made progress?
I was waiting for you to say that word.
Progress?
No,
Assessing?
assessment. Yeah,
Oh yeah,
assessment.
well
I
that's
figured that
that
was going to come
word.
up.
That's that word. Evaluate and assess.
Yeah. So I will say that gosh, evaluation and assessments continue to be an area where we are growing. I think I have not yet kind of come across a model that I'm like, absolutely, yes, this is how we need to
Okay.
be assessing students. So it's an area that we are still experimenting with and exploring. For us, a lot of the times, if I think primarily to kind of our enrichment program that happens
Mm-hmm.
either on the weekends or in an after school setting, our primary touch points are actually with the parents,
Okay.
which is a little bit different, I think, than being able or needing to provide that feedback to teachers. And
Yeah.
so what we have really learned and began to watch for is some of that closed loop feedback that we get from the parents about
Mm-hmm.
the development of their child.
Mm-hmm.
Because we can, over the course of 6 weeks, we visually can tell that the student, has opened up. They have become more vocal in sharing their
Mm-hmm.
ideas. They've also
Mm-hmm.
become, more vocal in helping to like facilitate discussions with others. Those are all
Mm-hmm.
things that we can qualitatively visualize. The other piece for us is really that parental feedback. And the parents, they know their kids.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so again, going back to kind of that qualitative means of kind of evaluating the impact of our programming. The From a quantitative perspective, what we really focus on is kind of a student's perspective on STEM, and
Mm-hmm.
whether their perspective has shifted over the course of
Mm-hmm.
our program. And we specifically look at whether that student whether we see a shift in that student being able to see themselves pursuing, a career in science, technology, engineering, and math, whether, that student believe these subjects are important. Those are all things that we will quantitatively assess.
Mm-hmm.
And so I will say that like assessment and evaluations is an area we have work to do,
Mm-hmm.
but we are definitely experimenting.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those areas, especially if you move from, the way traditionally
Mhm.
schools have tried to, you know, assess everybody the same way with the same at the same time and all of that, to more of a project-based approach where, you in theory you have the opportunity to give kids the space to learn at their own pace.
Yep.
Um, and that automatically begs the question, so how do you know that what kind of progress they're making,
Hmm. Hmm.
and what's the way to quote unquote assess that?
Assess. Yeah, it's a tough one. And I think back to, I've read several articles on using effort as the assessment
Hmm.
metric, because whether or not a student, quote unquote, completes a project, I think is one thing, but whether that student is putting in the effort, even though they failed several times, they still kind of take what they've learned and take another shot at it. I think
Hmm.
that's something that we, need to be able to assess.
Hmm.
And I bring that up, not saying that I have an answer to how we do that, but
Hmm.
like in
Hmm.
theory, like those are the things that I think, should
Hmm.
be measuring, especially as we look at project-based learning.
Yeah, yeah. I think the thing to keep in mind always with that, whether it's the traditional or the project-based learning,
Mhm.
you know, it's great to say, how much effort do they put in?
Yeah.
But if you start putting a number on that,
Hmm.
you're back to where you
Yeah,
were,
you are.
right?
You very are.
So it's kind of a catch-22. How do you get out of this
Yeah.
thing
Yep.
and be fair, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
and really, Pete, did you have a thought?
Well, my observation was that the bit of the assessment that you seem most comfortable with, or the evaluation, is what you can observe.
Hmm.
How is this student engaging? What effort are they putting in? And it's we got to resort to the numerical stuff when we can't see directly,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? And maybe that's just a time limit thing, because we might see if they're interested in or value in STEM education or STEM careers has changed by the decisions they make
Yeah.
down the road.
Yeah.
So they're just observations that are sort of delayed in time. But I think the sort of the emphasis on what can we see happening in the classroom, because I think that's where the good coaching comes from, right?
Yeah.
Is to be able to see something, understand it, and then react to it and help the kid get to the next place.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what we're all afraid of, or certainly, these days, is how can we make that objective and unbiased enough without resorting to having to do AP quizzes or SAT score quizzes and all of that? Because I mean, that's basically taking all of the bias out, quote unquote. But if you don't want to go there and you want to rely on observation by somebody that has experience and has training, is that acceptable to whoever needs to work with the student in the future?
Yep.
That's the biggest challenge. Do we trust each other to,
Yeah.
And the answer is no, not really. But we need to do better. We need to learn how to trust, the observation capability of the teachers, and let them focus on guiding the students and learning, as opposed to, coming up with a way to quantify what they know or don't know.
Absolutely. And I think
Go ahead.
Fellows program, I think, provides a great opportunity to begin to explore, what that looks like. And if that is, related to progress from a student perspective. So I think this is I know there are constraints, right? Because you're still operating in the system that, expects A, B, C, D. So there are definitely constraints, but, maybe there is, a way to carve out, a portion of assessment that you can start to exercise or experiment with some of, I guess, the newer or more radical ways of looking at student progress.
Yep. And learning how to model that and how to sort of encourage the learning, because part of what gets you past I learned that I failed is the encouragement of a coach, teacher, to keep trying.
Yep, absolutely.
Final thoughts. Any final thoughts from you, from Pete?
So, wow, final thoughts.
I mean, time flies when you're having a great conversation.
I was not expecting final thoughts already.
We can postpone them for another 5 minutes if you like.
No, it's fine. I will leave, I guess, the fellows with the note that we at Beyond STEM, again, I want to reiterate that we are here to support and to ensure that we provide everything that's needed for the teachers to be able to, have that great experience for each of the students. And so whatever that means, and of course, we have some work to define what that means, but whatever that means, we are definitely here to support and to lend our expertise in our programming to help support that mission.
Great. Sorry, got distracted by some other noise back in the background. Unfortunately, I can't mute myself. So, but no, I appreciate you coming in and talking about STEM, Beyond STEM, and beyond that, bringing the wisdom that you've gathered, going through education, going through designing the programs that you offer through Beyond STEM, and then putting your own experience as a student and then engineer into the mix of your recommendations and your suggestions to the fellows. So we really appreciate you taking the time to do this interview. It'll be available probably after the weekend in the fellow space. We can let you know so you can check it out yourself. And then next time, I should have this handy. I think we have I'll look that up and I'll put it in the notes with the article. Pete, final thoughts for you?
No, I think we're just thrilled to have Tanzania and Beyond STEM as part of this. I think
Partners,
it's
yes.
a great
I agree.
contribution to the program.
Perfect. All right. Well, let's end it on this note. Thank you very much again, and we're looking forward to working with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, guys.
All right.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.